Hi everyone, my name is Ahmed and welcome to the Desi Thumkaa Podcast. This is a podcast where we'll be just talking about my Desi experience along with our guests' Desi experience. And today, for our very first episode, I'm very happy and very thankful to have my best friend Hashim on the podcast with us here. So, Hashim, I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about yourself.
Okay, hey everyone. My name is Hashim, and I've known Emma since we were like, I think, 8 years old.
I think even younger, honestly.
Yeah, maybe like seven, eight. So it's been
Uh-huh.
like most of my life. And, like I'm an architect too. And, recently I graduated in 2022. And now I'm working at the AKDN, which is the Aga Khan Development Network, for the restoration of the Lahore Fort.
Amazing.
I
So,
graduated in
as
BNU
Hashim
in 2022.
Yes, BNU in Pakistan, and Hashim, you
Yes,
also live and work in Pakistan currently.
yes, born and
Uh,
raised.
in Pakistan. And on my end, I was raised in Pakistan, but at the age of 18, I moved to America, where I've been here for the past 9 years or so. So, Hashim is like the closest thing I have to a brother. He's been like my oldest friend, and like we've basically been in each other's lives since the beginning. But I think one conversation that we've never had and we've kind of taken for granted our entire lives is our desiness and our race and like the environment that we were born in. Because I think for so long, when you're like in the same environment with the same people, you kind of take things like your ethnicity, your race for granted. And it's only when you grow older and you're like removed from that situation, like say in my case, where I'm usually the only brown person in any given situation surrounded by mostly white people or people from other ethnicities and races. I think it brings up this topic of identity, which is why I wanted to have this conversation. I think we've been friends for like God knows how long, but we've never really had this conversation about our desiness and what it means to us and how it has shaped us into the people we are today. So, firstly, Hashim, I want to ask you, when you think of the word desi, what comes to your mind?
When I think of the word Desi, I think the first thing that I see or I think of is melanin, if
Mhm.
that makes sense, like brown
No, that
skin.
definitely, for sure. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think for me that is definitely the first thing that I think of. Um, I think that even now, like when you just talked about how you're always usually the only brown person in a room, right?
Mhm.
Surrounded by people of other ethnicities, and mostly it's white people. So I think especially in moments like that, you really are so aware of your desiness for that
Mhm.
reason. So yeah, that is the first thing that comes to my mind. And I also think that this is a conversation that we've kind of avoided for the longest time, right?
You know
Because
what? 100%. And I think we'll dwell more into that because I really want
yeah,
to get to the basis of why for so long we didn't talk about our desiness or look the other way, or maybe to even say look down upon desiness, right? Because I feel like the circles that we were in, the school that we went to, our education system, everything about us, there's so much deep roots that go into it of why for so long we have thought of desiness like maybe in like a negative way, and as we've grown older and matured more and come to ourselves, how our definition of desiness might have changed or how we look into it.
yeah.
So another question I want to ask you, Hashim, is that if you even identify with the word desi, and if you do or don't, why that may be.
I think in recent years, I really, if you had asked me this question, say even 3 years ago, I might have
Hmm.
said "No, not that much. Like on a scale from 1 to 10, I would have said like maybe two, like maybe
Hmm.
one. But now I would say it's like a good seven or eight,
Hmm. Right.
because I do think that I've learned to appreciate my desiness and my roots and my culture so much more in the past 2 3 years
Hmm.
alone. And I think a lot of that has to do with just seeing overall, like the state of the world today, and how
Mm,
brown people are treated, how Desi people are treated, and how it is really important to really truly embrace your identity and your culture, because at the end of the day, you know, that is like a really, really important thing about, an individual's personality,
mm,
wherever they may come from. And for us, it is our desiness. So instead
mm,
of avoiding it, and I think instead of trying to shirk away from it, why not embrace it? You
mm.
know?
Right. And I guess what aspects of it over these past 3 years have you started to embrace about it? And when I say Desi, I guess, it could be like culture, history, arts, like the whole spectrum of it.
So, like, I am like a very headstrong person, and if someone tries to force something on me, or
Mm-hmm.
try to like for example, in the past, if someone said to me, "Oh, you're not desi enough," or you're like trying to act so like different, and you're such a burger or whatever, then I
Uh-huh.
might have ran away from the desiness even more. But I think
Mm,
the past few years, I've really had the time to understand it in my own way, and to
mm,
kind of, like, how do I explain this? But like to kind of come towards this myself, rather
mm.
than, people saying that, oh, you're not desi enough. So like then I immediately want to be more desi. It's not like that. For me, it's the opposite.
Right. Mm,
And so on my own terms, trying to understand my culture, trying to understand why people think it's so important. I think only now have I realized that why people say that.
right.
So
Mm,
for me, I think that's been a big thing.
right.
And also, I
So,
feel like, living in Pakistan for so long, like, I think that when you're in high school, there's like this almost like this sword hanging over your head, right? That, oh, you have to go
mm,
abroad, like everyone is going abroad, I have to go abroad. I think this is a
right.
thought that comes in everyone's head, and I know it was,
Mm,
there for you as well.
mm,
And the fact is that I didn't go abroad. I stayed in Pakistan. And initially, I didn't really have very strong feelings about it. I was like,
mm,
okay, you know, I'll stay here for now. Maybe later on I'll go abroad, and
mm,
for my masters or whatever. And but I do think that the past 5 years when I was studying here were actually really, really good for me,
mm,
because I do think that where we studied, like where you and I were together at HSN, it is
mm,
a bubble. And I don't think it
mm,
truly represents Desi culture, and, especially like Pakistani culture and what all there is to offer. I think it's
mm.
like a, a very like whitewashed version of it. And I
Of course.
also,
Uh-huh.
yeah, and I also think that it's really important to meet people from all kinds of like walks of life, and
Mm,
from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, to really
mm,
understand your own country and your own culture and your own desiness
mm.
better. So I think for me
Right.
that was like a huge wake up call, that when I did my undergrad from Pakistan, I realized that okay, not all Desi people are assholes, and
Mm,
you know, uh, some of them are really nice, and some of them are
mm,
genuinely kind people. And
mm,
I think it's through that kindness that I learned to embrace it more, and actually
mm,
want to learn more about it, and
mm.
actually feel proud of it.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of what you said ties back to similarities of us growing up, and I think a lot of it stems from our education system. So to give everybody a little background, me and Hashim went to the same school, which is Hson College in Lahore, Pakistan. And we went there from second grade until we graduated high school. And as I've been researching, more about Desi culture and our heritage and everything, one thing that keeps coming up over and over again is how, we were a colony for the British for so long, right? For like over 200 years. And something to realize about Aitchison College is that it was also started during the time of colonization, right? And even the name Aitchison comes from, I believe, the person who founded Aitchison College, who was, I believe, a Britisher, right? And the education system that we follow in Pakistan, at least in Aitchison College, was the British education system. So since our, since we were practically born, we were taught to like speak English, like communicate in English. All of our classes were in English, right? And Urdu, which is our mother tongue, was like a secondary language for us that was just taught to us, like how Spanish would be taught as a class in America. And I think for both of us, I mean, and feel free to say if this was you think not the case for you, it might be different. But we were very whitewashed since, our very early days, since Aitchison or maybe even before, to the point, that we were watching like American TV shows, we were only consuming Western media. Like we weren't really watching shows in Urdu or reading Urdu books or like talking to each other in Urdu much, right? Like we were like mostly communicating English because I think there was always this stigma that, oh, like if you speak English, you're like from a higher class, you're more educated, you're more civilized, you're
Mhm.
more cultured. And if you speak like Urdu, it's the opposite. You're like lower class, lower income, like and like you said, there's ever since we were very young, there was always the thought implemented in us that we need to go abroad for education. And if you want to go abroad, we need to be like good at English and like X, Y, and Z. So I remember how much we hated Urdu class because, perhaps we didn't speak the language very well. And
Yeah,
to this day, I can say that I can't count past 20 very well in Urdu.
me either.
And it was this thing where like Urdu as a language, which is such a pivotal part of our Desi culture, was never given much emphasis to. And in high school, I remember instead of taking like Urdu class, we had to take Urdu literature. And we were forced to read these books, which would just like go over our head. And at least for me, I feel like it made me hate Urdu even more because I was like, this is a language like I'm being forced to like study in this class where we're reading this novel and it was called Dastak Na Do, which I believe means do not knock when translated to English. And but our professor for that class was also perhaps not the best, implement that love of Urdu in us. So having said all that, Hashim, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I literally completely agree with everything that you've just said. And I think that, growing up, even, I remember like before I even started HSN, like, we had to give like an entrance test. And this
Mm-hmm.
entrance test is like a very talked about thing all over the city that, it's like a yearly thing that moms are like sending their kids to tuition centers to prepare for the HSN entrance exam. So I remember at that
Mm-hmm.
time there were a few of my cousins who were the same age as me, who were also, preparing for the test at the same time. And I remember their moms asking my mom that, Hashim's English is so good. How is his English so good? And one of them even like once said that, Auntie, your English is not good, but how is Hashim so good? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she kind of insulted my mom that,
Right.
even though you don't speak that well like English, like he speaks it so well, but how? And my kid just doesn't know it. So first of all, just coming to that insult that she phrased it in that way, there is nothing
Mm-hmm.
wrong with speaking primarily in Urdu. I think that it is our a mother tongue, and it should be respected. Sometimes I feel like I wish I knew better Urdu, and I
Mm-hmm.
wish that I had taken more of an interest in it. And I also think, Emma, that you were absolutely spot on when you said that we didn't have the best Urdu teachers, especially in
Mm-hmm.
O levels. I know the teacher you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and we had, we shared that class. He was not,
That collective trauma together.
yeah, he was not like the kindest person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you are a teacher, you should be coming from a place of kindness and like a more
Mm-hmm.
nurturing attitude when you're trying to instill knowledge in someone, especially someone so young.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were not that old. We were like
Mm-hmm.
13, 14 years old, and someone is screaming at you that why do you not know how to count in Urdu? So
Mm-hmm.
when someone treats you that way, you kind of run away from it. Especially when
Mm-hmm.
everyone around you is telling you that you don't really need Urdu. As long as your English
Mm-hmm.
is good, you're fine. You're better than everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it does have a lot to do with our education system. That first of all, Urdu is just like maybe 1/10 of our school curriculum. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
separate language of its own. Every subject that we learn in English, and like that's the base language for it. So I think it was not given enough importance, and I also think it was not taught in a good fashion. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I came to BNU, I was doing my undergrad. I had to, I had to take like Pak Studies class and Islamic class again because it was
Mm-hmm.
like compulsory. It was part of the curriculum. In first year, they make you study both of these. And
Mm-hmm.
initially, I was really dreading it because I was like, this is so unfair. I already did this in O levels, and even then, I didn't want to do it. And now I have to do it again. But the difference was that this time, the curriculum, it was not, provided by the British Council. It was not whitewashed curriculum. It was, true Pak studies where we're learning the unfiltered history, not the whitewashed version in which the British, the colonizers, are looking, more humane, which they were not,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think I genuinely really enjoyed that class. And then even, Samyan's class, I got to learn so much more, so much of the positive things about our religion even, and
Mm-hmm.
that was like a great class for me as well. So I do think it has a lot to do with our curriculum. I think in our
Mm-hmm.
schools, I think it has a lot to do with the people teaching it. They're so frustrated with their own lives and they're just so done with everything that at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, I don't even know why they're teaching, to be honest. Like, I don't want to be mean,
Mm-hmm.
but that is my experience. And I
Right.
feel like, they could have been better in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I also think that this is like a little bit of that, mindset that our forefathers and, people who were unfortunately colonized by the British, they've kind of passed
Mm-hmm.
down this trauma over to, even our parents' generation, where,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of assume that the West is the best. And, if you have better English, automatically you're superior, you're better, and we don't really learn to value our own culture and our
Mm-hmm.
own local traditions and all of that. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that you genuinely, in order to like embrace it and embrace your desiness, I think we should also genuinely learn to respect it and come from a place of love when we are looking
Mm-hmm.
at it. So I think it's
For
about the
sure.
lens. If the people around us, the people who we are looking up to, like our parents and our elders, if they are even not looking at, our culture in a positive way or our desiness in a
Mm-hmm.
positive way, if they are telling us to be more whitewashed or more Western, then automatically we are going to go towards that. And if the people who
Mm-hmm.
are not as whitewashed, and if they are, like for example, the Urdu teachers or the kids around us that were not very good at English, whose primary language
Mm-hmm.
was Urdu, when they make fun of you for not knowing the language as well as them,
Mm-hmm.
there were those kids who used to make fun of us that when
For
Urdu nahi
sure.
aati. So
Yes, and I was. Oh yeah, sorry,
automatically,
go
I think
ahead.
yeah, yeah. So automatically, I think that you develop such disdain for such people that
Mm-hmm.
instead of wanting to be one of them, you want to be completely different from them, and you want there to
Mm-hmm.
be that difference. And you don't want to, you know, like become better at Urdu or try to be more integrated with Desi culture just to please these people.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, at least, it was something that I had to do genuinely from my own volition because I,
Mm-hmm.
at some point in my life, recently was interested in it and I wanted to learn more about it.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And looking back at it, I often think about like, the novel that we were at that time forced to read, for 3 years.
I
It
didn't
was a
even read it,
huge
by the way.
novel, and we barely,
My
nobody
mom,
read it.
my
Nobody read
mom
it,
read
right?
it for me and she read it
We
to me and she
barely read
was
it.
like, "You promise."
Right. And, sometimes I think back to that novel and I realize now, so many years later, that it was actually such a beautiful novel with such an important message, right?
Yeah.
And had we, either taken the time out or given the proper tools to read that novel, I think we would have learned so much more about our culture and like how, Pakistan was formed. Because to give our listeners a bit of a backstory again, the novel basically focuses on this family during the time of the partition of India and Pakistan, 1947, which is such a pivotal point in history for us and our culture, right?
Yeah,
And bringing up another story that you brought, there were a few instances during our high school where I don't want to say like victimized, but perhaps we were made fun of for speaking English better than we spoke Urdu.
yeah.
And like you said, that did cause some disdain in us about, our language and the people who speak it, because we were like, oh, these are the people who are making fun of us or looking down on us for speaking English.
We don't want to
So
be one of
why
them.
should why should we exactly like why would why would we want to be one of them, right? And another incident which I still hold so much trauma about, and I think
Yeah.
shaped so much of why I didn't even want to learn Urdu or speak it, was again talking about that professor that we had in Urdu class, where he corrected me for saying a word wrong. If you remember the
Yes, it
Subha
was the
Subhe
word
incident.
subha.
Yes, it was the word Subha, which means morning, and I had always heard the word spoken like that, right? But as I was reading the novel in class, the word came and I said Subha, and my professor stopped me and he corrected me and he said the word is Subhe. And I had never heard it pronounced like that. And I remember for 5 minutes how the professor, just drilled on me and practically made fun of me for not saying the word correctly.
He totally
And you
berated
remember
you
he
in front
said,
of the whole class.
yeah,
And then one
and
second later, he also said subha.
yes, and you also remember that he made the comment that he was like, "Oh, I'm sure you're from DHA," which
Yeah.
if you like to give our listeners some context, DHA stands for Defense Housing Authority, and it's a part of the city of Lahore where you could say the more affluent people of town live, and people who live there are more likely to speak English, right?
Yeah.
And I did live in DHA, right? And
Yeah.
for
It's
me in
like a
that
newer
moment,
suburb. So it's
it
like one of the
yes, it's
newer
a
suburbs of Lahore, and
mm,
a lot of new construction is happening there, and most people
mm,
nowadays do live there because you have
right.
newer, better houses here. So yeah,
And amenities and all of that.
and amenities
But
exactly.
at that one point where he said that to me, I just felt so weird because I was like, why does where I live have to do anything with how I speak my language or anything like that, Like as my teacher, as my professor, even if I did say a word incorrectly, you could just correct me like in a better
And then
way
move
instead
on.
of making fun of me and then move on, right?
Do
And
you
like
remember what he did to me?
yes, and exactly, like I don't know if you're comfortable sharing that story of like, a similar incident with the
Yeah.
same professor that happened in that class.
Yeah, so it was yeah, I can talk about it, not a big deal. So it was like he asked me a question. It was about two of the characters from this same book that we were just discussing, Dastak Na Do, in
Mm,
which he asked me what was the relationship between these two characters. It was there were these two people who were I said they were cousins because their parents were siblings.
which,
So
in Hashim's defense, nobody knows, at least in my circle, knows what the word for cousin is in Urdu. So
yeah,
even if you speak Urdu, you just call your cousin cousin.
like the answer was correct. Like I didn't like it was not like my answer was incorrect. That was what they were. That was their relation. And then he said,
Mhm.
"What's a cousin?" He's like, "You're not supposed to say that. They're chacha zad behen bhai." I had never heard that term before in my life.
Nobody had ever heard that
And
term.
yeah, nobody had. I mean, nobody could have answered that correctly. Even the kids who
Mm,
were very, very good at speaking Urdu. And
mm,
I was like, okay. And then he was like, "What's cousin? What's cousin?" He said it in a really like mean way, and like really
in like a very
like
demeaning way, I
in a
remember.
very demeaning way. He was trying to like make fun of the way I had said it, my accent or whatever. And after that, it became like a thing. Everyone would like kind of nickname me cousin, which was really weird, and they would
Mm,
say it in the same way he said it. And
mm,
like, First of all, this is exactly why I think everyone wanted to run away from Pakistan, because we thought all
Mm.
Pakistani people are like this. They're
For sure.
mean,
Uh-huh.
they're hurtful, they make fun of you for the smallest thing. And
Mm.
that's why, like I said earlier that when I came to BNU, when I started my undergrad, I realized that not all Pakistani people are bad. Some of
Mm.
them are genuinely humane and kind people. And I think coming
Mm.
from a place like a bubble like HSM, sometimes it is really, really hard to differentiate between that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, this was the story. And this is why, for the longest time, I think we were so traumatized of
Mm.
our desiness and especially the language, which is such a
Mm.
big part of it, really.
For sure. And
Yeah.
another question I want to ask you, Hashim, is growing up, you and I both, we consumed more Western media. Even when we were going out to see films in theaters, they were mostly like American Hollywood films. And even though Pakistan has a very thriving media industry of its own, like Pakistani dramas and movies and TV shows, growing up, we never really consumed much of them at all, right?
Hmm.
Why do you think that was?
So I think one of the main reasons is that we just we were encouraged so much, we were praised so much for our English, and we were encouraged so much to converse in English, that I think we kind of ran away from those Urdu television shows, firstly for that reason.
Mm,
I think there was also a stigma attached to it, that if you watch these shows, that you're kind of Pendu, and the word Pendu is like slang for, like, you're not cool or whatever, or that you're
mm,
kind of tacky, I guess. I don't know how better to describe it. It is a derogatory term. And
mm,
like, I also feel like the Desi dramas that we do have, I still don't watch them, by the ways. Like,
mm,
my mom and my dad, they do. And sometimes I'll sit with them and I'll watch like a few clips or whatever. But I do feel like our Pakistani dramas, they are mostly just about like young married couples and how they're struggling in their marriage. And so I do feel like the subject matter for me is really unrelatable right now, as I'm not married,
mm,
and also because that's all the shows are about, at least in my opinion. So that's another reason why I was just not interested to watch it. And I
mm.
think at the time, like, you and I probably had more in common with some strange teenager from the US or some
I
European
agree,
country
for
at the
sure.
time, because we had more
Mm,
things in common. We listened to the same music, we listened, we watched the same movies, the same television shows. Like, remember how big Disney Channel was at like
oh,
one
for
point in
sure.
time?
Mm,
So yeah, I think there were just a lot of contributing factors to it, but I think it really
mm,
just boils down to the fact that we were trying to run away from our Desi identity. We were
mm,
encouraged also to kind of converse more in English and kind of um, consume more of those media outlets that were in English, and there was like
mm.
nothing wrong considered about it. And I also feel like at that time, there was a time when, I don't know if you went through this experience, but do you remember Star World? It was like an Indian
Yes. Uh-huh. Yep.
television channel. So
Mm-hmm.
that was like when I was younger, like maybe in grade two to maybe four, grade two to four, it was like a really, really big thing over here. And my sister, my younger sister, she loved Star World. It was Star Plus, sorry, it was not Star
Star
World.
Plus. Yes, yes, yes. Star Plus.
Star Plus.
Yes.
So she loved Star Plus, and there were so many dramas that we would watch on it, and I would kind of like watch them in secret with her, and I would not tell anyone of my friends in school that I watched Star Plus, because I thought that if I
Mm,
tell them, then they'd like look down on me, or they'd think that I'm Pindu or whatever. And I
mm,
remember this one show. It was called Kasauti Zindagi Ki, in which there was like
mm,
one of the main characters. He gets murdered by, like, I think his wife or something. And I remember
mm,
it was like a big, like a big thing in like the Indian drama scene at the time, and
mm,
it was really shocking. It was like a soap opera. So the next day I went
mm,
to school. It was grade three, and I remember everyone's talking about this character and how he died, and I'm so shocked. I'm like, everyone watches this show, and I've been kind of hiding that I watch it.
mm.
It was really funny in that way, that some of these experiences, they're like a collective experience, but you just don't realize it.
Right. Mm.
Um, yeah, but like, I don't watch it anymore, of course. But yeah.
So that's very interesting. So in present day, why do you think it is that maybe you still don't consume more Desi media? Whether that could be, the Star Plus dramas you were talking about, or Pakistani dramas, or even like Indian movies as such.
Okay, so I think um, as far as the Pakistani dramas are concerned, I think once again, I'm just not really into soap operas. I don't watch American soap operas. I don't
Mm,
watch Indian soap operas anymore. I don't watch Pakistani either. Like, I've watched a few recently, like, not religiously, but like, we'll
mm,
watch an episode or two here and there. I just don't like the format of soap opera shows. I'm sorry. I
mm,
prefer like I guess I'm a bit snobby in that way. I prefer like more cinematic experiences, something
mm,
that maybe are more higher budget shows and all. And I think even in India you don't really find those. I think for that reason I tend to gravitate more towards American cinema. But
mm.
even in that regard, I don't consume as much as I once did. I don't even
Right.
watch that many films anymore.
Mm,
Um, but like, I'm not opposed to it. Like, I will watch like a good Indian movie here and there. But
mm.
I also feel like there is a cultural difference between Indians and us.
No, of course.
Um, so I think for that reason also, tend to I feel like it's kind of like almost like a betrayal that if I watch that and if I don't watch
Mm,
Pakistani shows or movies, then why should I watch that? At least that's where my mind is nowadays, so that's why I don't.
mm.
But yeah, I am not opposed to watching Pakistani movies or anything. I just haven't had the opportunity, I guess, lately.
No, that's
Because
fair.
even
That's
my
a very
friends,
fair question
yeah, because even
answer.
like my friends and all, they prefer to watch American, television
Mm,
or cinema and all.
mm. So, Hashim, another reason why I thought you would be a great first guest for the Desi Thumkaa podcast is because, as Hashim mentioned previously, he is an architect and I am also an architect. I am an architect living and working in Los Angeles. Hashim is an architect working and living in Pakistan, in Lahore. And recently, Hashim had a career change and he is now working with the Aga Khan Development Foundation. And he has started working with historic restoration, specifically Desi architecture from the Mughal era. So, Hashim, since you are much more of an expert in this than I am, can you tell
Not
us a
that
little
much
bit about
anyway.
can you tell us a little bit about your job, about what you do,
Yeah.
and your maybe newfound appreciation for Desi architecture? And maybe to give our listeners some context, um, it was very surprising for me that you made this switch into Desi architecture because as long as I knew you, you were always more interested in classical Western architecture,
Yeah.
which I would also like you to talk a little bit more about the architecture scene in Pakistan, of how similarly perhaps Western architecture is looked more fondly than our own Desi architecture, which, comes from our roots. There is a certain reason why, you know, Pakistani architecture would work better for our climate, for our environment, yet more people choose to get their houses designed in a Western manner.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that for like the viewers who don't have an architecture background, to really simplify it, why we kind of, like why a lot of the houses nowadays you see in especially newer developments like DHA, you will see like an array of different architecture styles, right? And I think that historically, even if we look at really, really old buildings or like, ancient cities and all, I think that architecture and these cities and their ruins can really give us a really, really good idea of the life that took place at that time. And studying these places, these cities, these buildings, these old buildings, it will let us know about the people who lived here, what they were interested in, what was their culture, what was, you know, their day to day, how it was really. So if you just think about even architecture today from that lens, buildings are essentially, they're a reflection of the people who made them or the people who live there. And so the fact that we have such um, different architecture styles here, we have from all over the world, especially a lot of Western architectural styles over here nowadays. I think it just goes on to show you that once again, that kind of like whitewash and colonial mindset that has been
mm,
so deep rooted in our people, that they just feel like anything that is, you know, related to the West is automatically better. So
mm,
people are going to make houses that are more European. They are going to make buildings that have nothing to do with our local context. It has nothing to do with our cultural history, our architectural history of this region. And they're just going to make what they think looks really good and what they think is, you know, it looks good, and they can impress the people around them that, oh, look
mm,
how elite we are, look how high class we are. And I think this just goes on to show you that people are really confused about their identity, in
mm,
our country. Like they don't know how, like this is a conversation about how desi you are. I feel like a lot of people aren't that desi, and so they don't want houses like that.
mm,
And but it's a more nuanced conversation at the same time, because when you look at houses, right, like you don't know the people who are living here, you don't know their life story. So
mm,
recently, like I had a client who had lived many years in England, and so the house that she was renovating, like it was her new house. It was like, for her it was a new house, but she was basically renovating this old one that she had bought. But she wanted it to have like a very British vibe to it, because she
mm,
lived in England for many years, and so she kind of felt like that was a part of her identity. But I
mm,
think for someone from the outside looking in, they're gonna think that's really weird. Why does she have such a British looking house in Pakistan, right?
mm,
So I mean, not to judge anyone for their personal taste and
mm,
what they, want to make their house like and what they want it to look like from the inside or the outside. But I do think that this is like a very individual thing. And I do think that we should celebrate our local architecture and our
mm,
local, like, craft and, historical styles of building and all of that. I think those are literally not practiced anymore at all. Like,
mm,
even if we look at a building that is being newly constructed, but it has, like, these jharokas, and it has these very, very Mughal kind of influences on it, and even the building techniques are very old school. Even that kind of looks really out of place, doesn't it?
mm. I know, I agree.
Like, it's interesting, and I think we can respect it. But at the same time, you think to yourself that, but this is also as out of place as maybe that really French or European looking house
Mm,
next to it. So they're both technically
yeah.
maybe not for this time anymore. I think
Mm,
architecture should be a reflection of the current times. And
mm,
right now, I do think you can do construction that is a bit more modern while still rooted in your culture and
mm,
still rooted in the local, vernacular architecture and all that.
mm,
So, like I said, it is a very nuanced conversation. It's not, there's no one
mm,
right answer to it. And
mm,
as far as, the work that I'm doing now at the Lahore Fort is concerned, I thought it would be like a good choice for me to maybe pursue this for now, because what
mm,
better way to learn about our history and our culture, and especially, like the height of, the architecture that was being done over here. Like, this is literally the best of the best, right, that we can
mm,
still see today in terms of architecture in the subcontinent.
mm,
Like, when you see these buildings and when you understand how they're made, you do not understand how these people made these buildings so many hundreds of years ago, and
mm,
how they're still standing today, and how they are so scientifically made. And this is before a time when people had paper degrees, right? Now,
right.
in order to make a building, you need a degree, you need a license. This is way before
Mm,
all of that, and yet I think they probably did a way better job than us.
mm,
And so it's just, I think it's really wonderful to be able to be a part of that, even in a really small
Mm,
way, and to be able to work with all these really amazing people who are contributing to this and who are trying to, restore these buildings so that our future generations can look at them, they can study them, and they can also learn from them. And
mm,
I think, once again, coming to how buildings can let you know about how people lived in a certain time, I think this is like, once again, for me, it's a great learning experience to see how life
mm.
was at that time and how maybe
No, that
life
sounds
can be.
amazing. So, Hashim, now that you're, working in historic preservation, are there
Yeah.
any specific elements of Desi architecture that you can tell our listeners that are very specifically Desi, as you could say, like architecture pertaining to the Indian subcontinent, or maybe even like I don't know if there's more specific Mughal Pakistani architecture.
Um, I'm trying to think. Sorry, what was the question exactly again?
So more so if like there are certain elements of
Yeah.
architecture that you've noted in your job that are very specifically Desi. Like if like
Yeah.
a foreigner was to ask you like what are some elements of Desi architecture, what would you say to them?
So I would say that in Desi architecture, like they really, these people like who made these buildings, they would really think about the climate, and
Mm,
they would really think about making buildings that would suit them in different times of the year. I think now we don't think from that perspective. Like
mm,
if you go to the Lahore Fort, for example, all of the really famous monuments there are actually at the roof level. So like Sheesh Mahal and
mm,
um, like Diwane Am and all of these are actually made like on the top of the Lahore Fort. And these are rooms that were mostly accessed during the winters and all. And all of their gardens also they're on the rooftops. Whereas their living quarters where they would live were below these levels. So they were more like
mm,
subterranean. And they're made so scientifically, like the walls are so thick, and they were made this way on purpose so that in the winter months they would be well insulated, and the cold couldn't really come in. They also they had water from the river that was nearby
mm,
Ravi coming in through, like these little channels that they had made. It would enter the building, and they actually had canals running below the floors so
mm,
that during the summers the cold water would be below the floors, and it would cool the rooms, and it would also come into the rooms through some channel in little ponds that they had made with
mm,
fountains and things like that. And during the winters they would heat this water, and then they would once again put it into those channels below the floor so the rooms would be warmer. And
mm,
they also looked at the wind directions, where the wind is coming from, and they would have these jalis in place over there made out of marble carved by hand. And the marble jalis would actually be kind of thick so that the wind could like filter through it in a
mm,
specific way. So I think that we don't do these things anymore. We don't
mm,
think that sensitively about these things. Like even if we're trying to
mm.
recreate some of these elements, they will be like a very poor imitation of it. And I
Right.
think instead of thinking more about like why they did these things, like at that time I feel like a lot of their ideas came from they stemmed from functionality, but
Mm,
then they would ornament them to make them look really beautiful. you
right.
know so it was not so it wasn't apparent that this is actually like a very functional thing that they're doing. It would seem
Right.
almost like this is just for show, this is just for the beauty. But
Mm,
I think that now what we have done is that we're so impressed by the pomp and the beauty that we try to replicate that, but not all of the really amazing engineering and the scientific
mm,
things and the reasoning behind these
right.
beautiful elements that we see. So I
Yeah.
think that it's a fact that we no longer have that kind of skill. Like the
Mm,
workers and the artisans, they don't have that kind of skill level
for
anymore
sure. Uh-huh.
to make a lot, to reproduce a lot of these things. But even if we just think maybe about the functional aspect of these buildings and try to somehow incorporate those in architecture
Mm,
in like a simpler way even. I think that would be
mm,
a great step forward for architecture,
mm,
like Desi architecture
mm.
in Pakistan.
No, that sounds very interesting because in architecture nowadays, you usually hear the phrase like form over function or function over form,
Yeah.
basically stating that you can either pick one or the other, but not both.
You don't have
But
to.
from what you're saying, it sounds like Desi architecture kind of implements the best of both. Like it is form and it is
Yeah,
function. Very
absolutely.
interesting. So pivoting a little bit from that and back to more about our sense and our identity of Desiness. Hashim, you've had the privilege of traveling internationally to many different countries. You have siblings that live all over the world. Um, and when you're traveling to these countries, you come into a similar position as me, where, you might be the only brown person in a situation surrounded by people of other colors, races,
Yeah.
ethnicities. Has there ever been a time where you have felt you had had to hide your desiness while you were abroad?
Yes, I actually have the perfect story for this. So this
And
is
I was
back.
hoping you were going to talk about this. And I
Yeah,
want to see if we're thinking of the same story because you've told me the story before.
I mean, let's see if it's the same story or not. But this was back when I think I had just turned, I was 17 years old when this happened actually.
Mm,
And I had gone for the first time alone. Like I was traveling abroad. I went alone and I was going to France. So my sister was doing her MBA at the time from France, from AGC, which is like an hour away from Paris, in this little town called Jouy en Josa. So I stayed there with her, and she was doing her classes and stuff. And then in the morning, I would just like take the train. I'd go to Paris. I'd see the city, do all the sightseeing stuff and all that. And then in the afternoon, she'd come and she'd meet me in the city, and then we'd hang out and go for dinner and do all the touristy stuff. So I don't know if this is the story you were talking about, but there was this one time that I went to this shop and I was buying
this is the
something.
story. I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
This
I'm
is the
pretty
story.
sure.
I was buying something, and the guy, like, it was like an arts related shop. They had like paintings and, books about art and, things like that. So I had like a decent amount of knowledge about this stuff because, I've been an art student my whole life. And the guy was maybe a little impressed with that. And then, I was buying like a book, and then he was like, "Oh, where are you from?" And, I immediately, I got a little bit stiff and I didn't know how to answer him because Pakistanis are looked, we are kind of looked down upon in Western
Mm,
countries and all. And I was not super comfortable telling him where I was from because I thought that, oh, maybe he might be mean to me. And I had, prior to going to France, I had heard from a lot of my relatives and family friends that, oh, French people are not very friendly and they're very, they're kind of racist. That was not my experience, by the way. And so, when he asked me, I was like, "Oh, I'm from Pakistan." I said it really low, like my voice was really low when I said, "Oh, I'm from Pakistan." And then he was like, "What? I'm sorry, I didn't get you." And then my sister, she just immediately like pulled on my jacket and she's like, "Why are you being so underconfident telling him that you're from
mm,
Pakistan?" She's like, "Be proud of the fact that you're from Pakistan and tell him you're from Pakistan. It's not a big deal. Like, you should
mm,
be proud of where you come from." And then, I got my voice and then I was like, "Oh, I'm from Pakistan." And then he
mm.
looked at me, he's like, "Really? Are you sure? You don't look like you're from Pakistan."
Oh, wow.
And
Interesting.
at that time, I was really happy hearing him say that because I was like,
Mm,
"Oh my God, I'm not in Pakistan." Like he thinks I'm like a foreigner or something. I think this is also like a very like cultural. Unfortunately, it's like a thing over here that if people think
mm,
you're a foreigner, automatically you assume that's like a positive thing rather
mm,
than it being a negative one. So yeah, that's what he said to me. And then later on, now when I look back to it, I'm like, first of all, I should have just answered him normally. I should have just. It did not have to be like such a big thing, and also I no longer, I don't think I would be happy if someone said, "Oh, but you seem like a foreigner," or "You don't seem
mm,
like a Pakistani," because like I don't want to like be so disassociated from my roots and where I'm from that I take pride in that. Not at all.
Hmm. Right.
Was this the story you
No,
were thinking
that's so this isn't actually the story I was thinking of. The story that I was thinking of was the time when you were in France and you were buying a bottle of water, but you didn't want to. I don't remember entirely what it
This was
was,
in
or like
Italy.
you
This
had
was in Italy. So this was in
oh where
Italy.
you had said that the water was too expensive or something, and
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. So
shopkeeper
this
made a
was
comment.
this was in Venice. This was another trip. This was a trip that I took in 2018, and yeah. So I was with my brother. We were in Venice, and I was really thirsty, and I didn't have any water with me. Um, so I went to this little shop, and I was like, "Oh, how much is the water for? Like, can I have a water?" I instead of asking the price, I first told him that I want water. So he brought it out, and then I asked him, "Oh, but how much is it for?" And he said to me, "It's like 15 euros or something," which is
Mm,
ridiculous for like water, right? He was
right.
trying to rip me off because he thought he's like a dumb tourist, so I can like overcharge him.
Hmm.
And it was my fault. I didn't ask him for the price before I asked him to ring it up for me.
Hmm.
So then I was like, I'm not paying 15 euros for like a bottle of water. So I was like, no, it's okay. Then I won't take it. And then he got really mad at me. And he's like, you Indians, you are always bargaining and you need to
Mm,
bargain on everything. And then by that point, I had started walking away from him. And I just turned around. I was like, I'm not Indian. And like,
right.
I literally was laughing. I was like, dude, I'm not Indian. And then I just like
Right.
went away laughing. And then I got like, decent priced water. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was definitely a funny experience also. But I
Yeah.
think the first
But
story is a bit more relevant to the Desi experience, perhaps.
right. But I think both of them in a way are right. We're like in one sense or the other, like even in your first story, where you at the time you thought that, him saying, "Oh, you don't look Pakistani" was a compliment. But both these Europeans were in some way looking down on us as like Pakistanis, as Desis,
Yeah,
based on our skin color, right?
yeah.
And as you brought up, like Pakistanis and Desis in general are, for one reason or the other, looked down upon, by Westerners. I'm not entirely sure if it's still the stigma of like, white people thinking they're more superior to us because, it was white people who had colonized us for so long. And, that could be like a much, much longer and more in-depth conversation of how, Westerners have looked down upon us for so long and how as we enter these spaces, it is important for us to show them that, we are their equals. We are not greater than them. They are not greater than us. Having said that, Hashim, how do you think in our current day and age, in 2023, with everything that is going on, we can do a better job of representing our desiness, of being more proud of it, of having this more open conversation with people who may not be familiar with the phrase desi or what desi people are, or lumping all people of color into one category?
Um, okay. So that's a very interesting question, I have to say.
Mm,
So I think that first of all, we should give people the opportunity to be as desi as they're comfortable with. And I think that no one should be forced to be anything that they're not.
mm,
And at the same time, I think that we should make we should try to portray our culture in always in a positive way, right? So if we're going
mm,
to be mean, or if we're gonna like try to be like negative about it, and if we're coming from a place of negativity, I think that it will never look appealing to a younger generation and to people who are still trying to explore their desiness. So first of
mm,
all, and the reason for this is that I think we live in a very, very modern world right now. I think people have, like, I think that we are going towards a time when where most people, like, most countries, their culture is going to be really, really condensed to almost nothing. And everyone is just going to have, like, this global culture that we're following. And I think this is a result of, the amount of connectivity that we have today, through social
mm,
media and through technology, that it's really blurring the boundaries between culture because everything is so easily accessible to us. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that this is like it's a tough thing because I think you can't force anyone to really accept their roots and their culture, especially if you're gonna be negative about, or if you're gonna berate someone for not being desi enough or brown enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you come from a place of love and acceptance and kindness, then it seems that much more appealing to, a wider audience, and especially like the newer generation.
Mm-hmm.
So probably, start there, start small, and different aspects of our Desi culture will appeal to different people and different, young Desi people. So I think for me and you, a big part of it was definitely, the arts and the culture and the architecture and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think learning more about that made us more interested in learning other things about our Desi identity and our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then, eventually, we got into other things, we got to learn more about that. So I would say whatever you are interested in, start there and at the pace that you want to go at, and also try to learn from the right people. Like if you go to
Mm-hmm.
someone who's like, like our Urdu teacher from high school, then you're just going to run away from it. So, you know I think it's just really important nowadays to just be kind, honestly,
Oh,
in every
that's
way,
incredible.
about everything.
Mm. No,
Yeah,
I think you have a great outlook on it. And, I think for the both of us, I am very happy of how we have matured and learned to accept our culture and our heritage and our roots, our language, everything about our Desiness.
yeah,
We're learning to accept it more as we grow and mature. And I hope over time, we delve deeper into it and learn more
yeah,
about so many things that we didn't get the opportunity or the chance to when we were growing up. So, Hashim, I
absolutely.
want to thank you again so, so much for being our first guest at the Desi Thumkaa
Thank
podcast
you.
and
Thank you.
sharing, your lovely insight with us. As we approach the end of our podcast, is there anything you would like to plug, your Instagram, anything else? If you want to let people know where they can find you, any side gigs you might have, your architecture services, anything like that?
I mean, really, I'm super low key about all of this, and even my architecture services are pretty much word to mouth right now. But
Mm,
I do plan on eventually, maybe making like a public page for my work,
mm,
all my art related work. And when I do,
mm.
I hope that the Desi Thumka podcast and the Instagram can, advertise it for me. But for
Of
now,
course, we will be the first.
yeah, but for now, I'm just so thankful that we could have this conversation and really delve
Mm,
into it. And it's really refreshing that I think a lot of our, experiences, they're so similar. And
mm.
it's really nice having this conversation. Thank you so much, Emma, for having me as your first guest. I'm honored. So yeah, this was
Oh,
really
thank
great.
you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Okay.